what are the biggest contributors to land development project delays today from what you're seeing?
Some of it certainly is organizationally understanding sort of what needs to happen first, second, third to get a project designed. So a lot of times what we'll do is even if we don't have the in-house services where I am at Howard Stein Hudson, we don't have land surveying or wetland science. So when you're doing a land development project, certainly one of the first things you need to do is get your resource areas flagged by a wetland scientist. So then followed by the full field survey. So a lot of times
Delays in land development projects can often feel inevitable. But what if many of the biggest slowdowns are actually preventable? From regulatory approvals to stakeholder coordination, minor missteps can quickly turn into major timeline setbacks for communities awaiting new housing, infrastructure, and growth. In this episode, I'm speaking with Katie Enright. Katie is a licensed professional engineer, associate principal, senior civil engineer, and Chelmsford office manager at Howard Stein Hudson. We'll discuss the top causes of land development delays, the strategies that truly accelerate permitting and stakeholder alignment, and how intentional community engagement can really help maintain momentum through a project's life cycle. Before we jump in, I want to tell you about AEC PM Connect, an interactive in-person experience where civil engineers can sharpen their project management and leadership skills and learn about topics like AI in project management, earned value, risk management, and more. And here's the exciting part. At this event, we'll also be announcing the winners of the AEC PM Awards, recognizing professionals who lead with purpose and deliver measurable results. We're trying to raise up project management in our industry and shine a light on it. Just imagine someone from your firm being named AEC PM of the Year. That kind of recognition can boost your people, your culture, and your firm's reputation in a big way. The event will take place on June 10, 2026 at the Forest Gate Country Club in New Jersey. You can register now at aecpmconnect.com. Again, that's aecpmconnect.com. And if you want to nominate someone for the awards, head over to aecpmawards.com to download the nomination guide before the deadline of February 28th. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast, the industry's leading show for civil engineering professionals, ranked as the #1 civil engineering podcast by FeedSpot. All right, I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Katie Enright is a licensed professional engineer, associate principal, senior civil engineer, and Chelmsford office manager at Howard Stein Hudson. Katie, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Katie, why don't you start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into civil engineering and land development?
Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of Boston in Massachusetts, sort of in the country. I was good at science and math. At that time, when you were good at science and math, you were directed through your student counselors to go to engineering school. So this was, 30 years ago. So I went to a small college up in Burlington, Vermont, St. Michael's College, right outside of Burlington. They had just developed an engineering degree, which was a program that got you a Bachelor in Arts from St. Mike's, and then you could go to Clarkson University to get your civil engineering degree. I ended up loving Burlington, staying in Burlington, and then when I wanted to finish my civil degree, I came home and went to UMass Lowell. When I went to UMass Lowell, I got the old-fashioned phone book out, and back before you could Google on the internet civil engineering companies, and I ended up in a surveying and civil engineering company near college and started working there part-time.
Oh, interesting. And I do remember the phone book because we used to let our kids sit on it at the table so they could read.
I looked up civil engineering and I just started calling places to see who had a job for the summer.
Right. AAA, civil engineering is my first call, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
It was an H. I ended up in an H.
Okay.
Well, I ended up at a company called the Howe Surveying Associates. That was in the next town over, and stayed with it.
That's great. So we're going to talk about land development today, and we're going to start by talking about delays. So what are the biggest contributors to land development project delays today from what you're seeing?
Delays, mostly, some of it certainly is organizationally understanding sort of what needs to happen first, second, third to get a project designed. So a lot of times what we'll do is even if we don't have the in-house services where I am at Howard Stein Hudson, we don't have land surveying or wetland science. So when you're doing a land development project, certainly one of the first things you need to do is get your resource areas flagged by a wetland scientist. So then followed by the full field survey. So a lot of times we'll work with the client to basically manage those other contractors or subcontractors through us so that we can really get a good understanding and direct those individuals first so that by the time we get the project, um, I always tell people our engineering is only as good as the base it's drawn on. We really need to make sure that the right people are out there flagging the wetlands, that we've got all of the information necessary in the field survey to move the project forward. So I like to sort of control that aspect of the project. And then next, really what comes into play is making sure that an architect has been engaged so that we understand the size of the building or what the client would like to accomplish with the building, and then get it submitted. Once the project is submitted, where we're seeing most of the delays is through the public process. The public process feels like since COVID in particular, has gotten gotten a lot more extensive than it used to be. I think both good and bad. There's a lot more people who are on social media. There are a lot more people who can access the meetings, which is great because a lot of meetings are still live taped. And so you can attend a meeting virtually and comment virtually. And it feels a little bit like it extends the process a little bit by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think all great points. One of the points there that I just want to really reinforce that I think is important, being that I also did land development as a civil engineer earlier in my career, is like Katie said, really understanding the project, right? And how a project flows and what the critical path items are on your project, because then you can almost get ahead of it a little bit when you start a project, right? And we do a lot of project management training, and the whole idea of, identifying some of the risks ahead of your project, right? Like permitting might take longer than we anticipate, right? And having some kind of a plan in place to deal with that should and when it happens, because a lot of times it will, but then also knowing where you need to push on other parties or stakeholders or people even internally, because you know that that's a critical path item on the schedule. And if you know if that lags, you're going to be in a lot of trouble and your project's going to have delays. So I think that's part of being a good civil engineer is in a lot of ways you're like the project facilitator, not just the project manager, because you might be dealing with the survey and then you're dealing with the architect, right? And you're dealing with the client. And so you're kind of like
100%.
you're kind of like that middle person, and if you don't keep everyone going, that could be a definite cause for delays.
Yeah. We also too, in relationship to the public process, I should say we're starting the public process a lot earlier than just formal submission on a lot of projects too, is really kind of educating the public, having, a coffee hour or a meet and greet or an abutters meeting to kind of figure out where people's concerns are and try to make sure we get those integrated into the project, maybe before we get to the formal process, which also kind of helps things, I think, along the way too.
That's great. Early communication, I think, with the stakeholders is really important on our types of projects. So I know one of the delays that land development projects always experience, like I just mentioned, is the permitting process, right? The regulatory approvals. It seems like they're taking longer and longer these days. I'm curious as to any tips that you might have or what you may have seen in terms of trying to expedite or at least keep the permitting and regulatory approval process, on schedule on your projects.
So, unrelenting communication all the time is calling the planner, calling the conservation agent, calling the DPW, everyone who has some sort of stake in the project, meeting with the fire department and the police department prior to submitting, and really communicating sort of what we're looking to do, make sure you understand all the requirements, make sure that your package, by the time it gets to submission, your package is as complete as it possibly can be, so that it can start the process and start to move through the process. And also, if you can get buy-in from different town departments prior to submitting to that seems to really help is to really kind of sort through all of the issues as you're designing it rather than wait until it's designed and have to go back and revise it to meet. And usually I'm not talking about things that might be requirements more than like a policy or how someone might interpret the regulations or what they feel comfortable with. You probably saw it when you worked as every fire chief. There's a certain very specific set of regulations and rules that you have to meet, but there's very specific requirements that a lot of different fire departments want to see. There's different size vehicles depending on what town you're in, and really trying to drill down on all of the unique issues that might come up in a community.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. And I think having some kind of I call it a kickoff meeting. You could also think of it as a pre-submittal meeting, right? If you're submitting to agencies or towns for review of your plans, to check in with these departments and say, hey, I know we need to provide emergency access to our site. What does that look like, right? Is it like can
Exactly.
we use like a, porous paver type of, roadway through our site? Like, what do you want to see? What are the specifications? This way you're not guessing. And
100%.
just like Katie said, getting the early communication with those stakeholders, it may prevent you from an extra submission, right? Because every time you submit it, now you got to wait how many weeks for them to maybe review it and get back to you. If you could cut one of those submissions off, you're really going to expedite your project and keep the project on track. So that upfront communication is, I think, so important. And even with a permitting agency, again, a pre-submittal meeting, right? Hey, we're planning to submit this package to you for a permit. What should we know ahead of time? This is a little bit about our project. Oh, really? You're next to that stream? Well, then you need to give us some additional information. We want to see this. We want to see these elevations. Like, okay, great. We got to send the survey out to get information.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. So
So
having
it's
that,
just a lot of communication. Yep.
yes, a lot of communication. And I know, you know, people will always tell you as a civil engineer, as a project manager, you need to communicate a lot. And that's true, but it's also the idea of early on, right? Having the conversations early on in your project and then throughout the project, of course. Like, we're not saying you have a kickoff and you get all this great communication, then the communication drops off. It's got to be an ongoing process. But the earlier you can get it, then you're going to reduce some of those risks and make sure that you keep your timeline going, which I think is
Well, and
really
like you
important.
said, a lot of these board meetings are happening once or twice a month. So you miss one, you you don't do something that needs to be done, you're waiting another 2 weeks to 4 weeks to get in front of this board or commission, and time is money. So,
Absolutely. And that's why it's always good to communicate with people and not guess what they want to see on a plant set, right? Or what they want to see on a detail set, right? So I know sometimes if it's possible in some municipalities, you might be able to have a technical meeting with the city engineer before you go to the planning board, right? And the city
right.
engineer is going to tell you what he or she wants to see. And then also they probably have a good feel for what the planning board likes to see in a certain situation, right? You're going to have a detention pond on your property. Well, this is what the board's going to ask you for, right? So getting ahead of these things is going to save you a lot of time.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, Katie, I want to talk a little bit about multidisciplinary teams. A lot of our listeners work in multidisciplinary civil engineering organizations. And I'm curious as to, from your experience, how do you keep multidisciplinary teams aligned and communicating efficiently, throughout the entire project, whether it's internally, externally, you might have a sub that's on your team that does one of your services, right? What can you offer up in that regard? Because I think that can be a challenge for civil engineers or project managers.
No, absolutely. And I think it goes back to sort of our first conversation and our first question about understanding what someone's role is in the project and where it fits into the project life, right? So, and some of our counterparts might be in office and some might be out of the office. Like I said earlier, like we sometimes will sub out to a wetland science to get the wetlands flagged. Then we'll sub out to a surveyor and get the field survey done. And we have different contractors we use for different size jobs and or different towns they might have worked in. But then in-house, so we'll be doing the civil engineering drawings. Sometimes there's a land use attorney that's involved in the permitting. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes we're doing the applications. Sometimes the attorney's doing the applications. Sometimes they're doing the formal submission. So again, it's all about communication. We'll do in-house traffic studies here. So a lot of our projects we're doing the site plan and special permit submission, we'll have our own traffic folks do the traffic study for a project in-house. Sometimes there's roadway improvements that then need to be done with the town, and that's a whole nother department that does public projects. So again, it all goes back to communication. It all is about making sure everybody's on the emails, that everybody's aware of what their role is and when something is due, and what the expectations are. So expectations, estimate of cost and hours to be worked on, just super important to not forget about, is what's your budget? How much time do you have to do this piece of the project? When is the deliverable expected? So that the next person can pick it up and run with it. So it really is about the project team and communicating with them as a team. And I CC everyone on everything because you just don't know how that might affect their deliverable at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one takeaway from our conversation here for me so far is yes, communication, but I think creating some kind of regular channels for that regular communication right early on and throughout your project, right? Because you'll hear people, like I said, tell you all the time, you got to communicate, 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 which is true. But in practically speaking now, like, how do you do that, right? And like we said, you could do a kickoff meeting, right? You could do pre-submittal meetings, right? You're going to have meetings with maybe planning boards or other boards that you know are going to be on your calendar. And you're going to see on your calendar all these different communication points. And I think the more regular, whether it's like client updates on Friday, right? Or whatever regular communication points you can build into your project schedule, that's going to create the pathways for you communicating with the right people, right? Like maybe you do a team meeting once a week, which is your internal teams and your subs together. So you can go over like the deliverables and what we're going to work on this week and next week. And I think that that's a big thing for civil engineers because listen, we live in a world where you could do Teams messages, text messages, email messages, phone calls, and things can get very confusing. So, you know,
Well, that was going to be my next comment, is also understanding how your team wants to communicate,
exactly.
because there are a lot of people who send emails out every day with project updates, but you need to have a virtual meeting, a face-to-face. You need to have the phone call. There's some people that will only read a few lines of an email if it's more than a paragraph long. You need to
Yes.
understand how your team is going to communicate and have alternative methods if need be.
Yeah, and I know for our team here, sometimes if we do either a morning huddle daily or weekly, it can eliminate 50 different messages, right? Because it's easier for us just to get everybody on the same page. So, what I would say is, based on all the stuff that we've talked about so far, really thinking of a good communication plan on your projects or with your team management of how can we meet so it's not too often, but it's often enough to create those communication channels and make sure we have everything covered with our clients, with other stakeholders. Like if you're working on a big project and the mayor happens to be highly involved in it for whatever reason in that city, you're probably going to want to update them on like a monthly briefing or something, right?
Right.
To make sure you have the regular touch points built in. So, because if it's something like I'll tell them about it when I get around to it, or I'll tell them about it when something happens, it's just not going to happen with everything else you have going on.
Right. Yep.
And
Very true.
and that's a mistake that I think sometimes we fall into. So Katie, let's talk about technology here. What role do you see technology playing in land development, the timeline of projects? I guess just in general, what are you seeing from technology or AI when it comes to land development on your projects?
So I actually just went to a little talk about AI in the AEC industry, and um, it's not being used a ton yet. I think it's still. I've seen some examples of it starting to be used or how it might be able to be used, but I haven't seen a lot of it yet with what we are doing. I can tell you that I have clients and certainly abutters who will throw something into chat gpt and say, what does this mean, or what does that mean as far as a regulation or a type of project, or look through this zoning bylaw, tell me if this would be okay, type of thing to do. So using it more as a research tool than anything else. I think we're also using it certainly to sort of better read through things like reports and just work on sort of like structure and language and our communication skills. not so much as plan creation quite yet. I know it's coming, but not yet. We'll use things like we use AutoCAD every day, and so things like our 3D tools and stuff like that have certainly sped up things like design of roadways and grading and utilities. And then there's the other piece of it that's just, having a lot of the permit documents online. I mean, I remember when I first started, I was folding maps and, going to places to do research. Like it's unbelievably amazing how quick everything is now to do research at a registry of deeds or to find a plan of land. It's at your fingertips. It's right on the computer. GIS systems and all the towns and communities we're working in with amazing amounts of information that you can find, like where water lines and hydrants are located, where easements are located, where habitat areas are found, floodplain elevations. Like everything is available to us at our fingertips now, which is just, it makes things so much faster to be able to really, if somebody calls me with a piece of land, really do a really pretty deep dive in a couple of hours as to, these are the red flag issues that you might see. Zoning bylaws are online, wetland bylaws are online. Like before, I used to have to take cash and go to the town hall, right? And,
Good old
get a
days.
printed book.
Yeah.
Or go to the registry all day with a pile of quarters. And now you could just like grab everything online. So that I feel like makes things a lot easier. What we talked about before, having all of our projects on Facebook doesn't always make things easier in that part of
Right.
technology, because there's a lot of misinformation
Oh, yeah.
that's spread with that type of technology. But so the good and bad.
Yeah, for sure. So before we transition into our kind of career hot seat to wrap things up, any final pieces of advice that you would share to civil engineers and land development that are aiming to deliver, fast, high quality development projects in today's landscape?
Yeah, again, I think that what a lot of people don't realize with the civil engineering, especially in the land development world, is that aspect of really being able to not only be good at the engineering, but be able to communicate it to everyone, and being able to speak about a project and explain a project and basically have that really good, a great ability to really communicate and understand that you do really have to talk to people, talk to people all day, your coworkers, your contractors, your subs, the town, and the layperson that lives next door that just wants to know how this is going to affect, the pond that's in their backyard or on something to that effect. So it's really important, that ability to be able to not only do the engineering, but communicate it in a way that people understand.
Absolutely. And of course, it's no surprise that a running theme of our episode today is communication. I mean, I think it's one of the biggest, the most important skill set that a civil engineer and or a project manager in the AEC industry can develop today, because doing the work is one thing, but being able to explain it and communicate it to others is another thing, especially when you're talking about planning boards and zoning boards and politicians that are not technically savvy, right? But you have to explain to them why this project is going to benefit their community and have the ability to do those things. So, all good stuff here. What we're going to do now is we're going to transition into our hot seat segment to get some final career tips from Katie before we wrap up. In the AEC industry, skilled project managers are the backbone of success. EMI's AEC PM certification offers tailored training, ongoing support, and exclusive access to premium content that keeps your team sharp and effective. From foundational training to advanced leadership tools, set your team apart with certified growth. Learn more at aecpm.com. That's aecpm.com. All right, Katie, you're officially on the civil engineering hot seat. You ready to go?
Okay, yeah, I guess so.
All right, so first question, do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, maybe it's a morning routine or a lunchtime routine, or just something that you've done consistently on a daily basis that has contributed to your success as a civil engineer?
So I do, and unfortunately, it took me a really long time to learn this. But I've learned to take breaks and realize to give myself some space before sort of stressful conversations or after stressful conversations, and not plan back to back meetings, to take a minute to breathe, take a walk outside, listen to some calming music, and to not sort of let the stressors of every day just build and build and build until the day is over, and to really take those breaks for yourself.
That's great. Like a just a break from everything,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Essentially. That's great. So I'm just curious if there's a book or an author or some kind of philosophy or training program or something that stuck with you along the way in your career that has helped you to develop as a person or as a professional that you can offer up if there is something that you encountered.
No, I wouldn't say I tend to read more for pleasure than I do for sort of professional, um, and work. So there's not too much I
So
have to
there isn't
say.
like a framework or anything like that you've leaned on in terms of developing some of your leadership or communication skills. It's just been kind of what you've seen and what you've
Not
interacted with.
really. I've worked with life coaches for probably the last 5, 6 years.
Okay.
And that has been really helpful. And I'm sure that there's a lot of sort of books that we've discussed and had pieces of for the last 6 years that have sort of helped with things like work-life balance, especially like understanding, when to shut off and how to shut off, and how to sort of put boundaries around work. And then a little bit more about just how to communicate with people and things like that
I think
really,
that in its
really
own
help.
right is a great development tip, right? Is to know when you need to get some coaching, get some guidance, whether it's a life coach, a professional coach for a certain skill set, right, or something along those lines. I think is a really great attribute for any leader, especially at technical professionals, because sometimes we need assistance with some of the non-technical, skill sets and leadership skills. And I think any way that you can find help on that, whether it's a coach, whether it's a program, whether it's a book, just continuing to develop yourself, I think is a very positive approach to one's
Yeah,
career.
it's really been invaluable, the advice that I've gotten. Yeah.
That's great. All right. So, Katie, thinking back to the managers that you've had in your career, you don't have to name any names, but if you think about your favorite or favorite managers, what was it that made them your favorite? We're just trying to understand some of the skill sets of really great leaders in the civil engineering industry.
Yeah, so I had, somebody I would call my mentor whom I worked with for 18 years from essentially the very beginning of my career, until I came to the company that I'm at now. And I feel that certainly his passion about what we were doing, why it's important, why, you know, being near your civil engineering projects, being able to, drive by them every day and kind of see what you're doing and the impact you're making to your community matters. And really understanding, how exciting that is and what you're doing. And understanding every facet of it. So from, whether it be, the certified mailings that you're doing to, being in the field and surveying. I did a lot of that when I first started. I was in the field, understanding where the information was coming from, and really kind of building on that from sort of start to finish of a project and really understanding all the people involved and all the pieces and just really caring about the final product and being honest and open too, I think is really important, being transparent and, really kind of explaining, how to sort of move up the career progression and the different types of qualities, and or education you might need to do that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the idea of a manager kind of being hands on with you and, walking you through stuff and showing you how important it is to be engaged in the different projects and the different aspects of project is really important because, as a civil engineer, we do have to be to some degree hands on and involved in our projects because, like I said earlier, we're kind of that middle person, connecting and communicating with everybody. Right. So I think I had a manager like that too, who was very hands on and would get into the projects with us and walk us through things. And I think that was helpful for my technical development, but also kind of modeling that as I started to get into leadership roles to bring my team members along, I think is very valuable in this profession.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Katie, I've got one final question for you. We call it the civil engineering career elevator advice question. So, if you got into an elevator with a civil engineering, like up and coming civil engineer, and you had about 30 to 40 seconds with him or her, what career advice would you share with them based on your career to date?
I think that is to I think that what I would tell them right now is to sort of figure out what drives you, what your passion is, and try to drive or direct your civil engineering sort of expertise that way. I think that a lot of us, myself included, got involved in, the everything of civil engineering land development. So, we do every type of project. And there's certainly ones that, feel better to me or feel like something that's, more exciting or more transformative to a certain area. And I think that somebody that's doing civil engineering really should think about sort of what they're looking to get out of their career, what type of land development they're doing. Are they looking to, better the environment or create housing to create some affordability? Are they looking to, you know, just whatever they're looking to do in the community and kind of really understand what that is and sort of drive their career in the company that they work for based on what they're passionate about.
I think that's great advice because I think the one thing about civil engineering is there's about a million different things you can do in the civil engineering industry. So if you can kind of start to early on in your career wrap your head around which is where you like to be and enjoy being, I think that's important. And if it's possible, getting a couple different internships or maybe getting in with a company that has some kind of rotational program where you can try different things, I think is important. Because for me, I tried geotech, I tried structural, and I finally landed on site civil, which I really liked a lot. But the reality of it is you're probably not going to learn about all the different avenues of civil engineering in college. So, getting exposure to different types of it and trying to align them with your passions, I think is some really good advice for one's civil
Yep.
engineering career. So with that, I want to thank Katie Enright. Once again, Katie's a licensed professional engineer, associate principal, senior civil engineer, and Chelmsford office manager at Howard Stein Hudson. Katie, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you. It was great to meet you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Katie. She was great. I mean, clear and early communication is the answer on civil engineering projects, but doing it just isn't that easy. So hopefully some of the tips that she shared can help you. And if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better project managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.